also have Adam Britton here today, who's going to be helping with some of the interactive sessions. So this slide here looks at what we're going to cover today. So I'll be providing an overview of marine biodiversity assessments, look at what we mean when we're talking about biodiversity indicators, why they're important, some examples of how they've been used in other places and areas, and also look at the work that's been done under this Darwin Plus project in terms of testing an indicator approach. So overall aims are to provide an overview of marine biodiversity indicators, to introduce the work conducted under Work Package 3 of this project, and also to better understand your priorities for measuring marine ecosystem health. So we now have a Slido poll, but I will hand over to Adam, if that's okay.
Sorry, muted. Thanks, Laura. Yeah, I think Slido worked quite well during the last sessions, last two sessions. So I'm going to try a few polls again. So we just wanted, this was a quick pre-workshop question, just to kind of see what look at people's understanding of indicators. And we'll do a question at the end, which is similar. So hopefully that'll improve that your understanding's increased. But I put the link to Slido into the chat. And it's also on the slide. So I'm just going to start the poll, and if you can type in the code. So yeah, I'll put the code in the chat as well, but it's on Slido homepage. You should be able to enter 1821510, and then the question is, how do you rank your current understanding of marine biodiversity indicators? And there's a multiple choice ranging from very good to very poor. So I'll leave that going for a minute or so. Already got some people put their answers in, so that's good. Oh, it's looking good so far. Yeah, some goods, lots of goods, and some very goods and fair. So that's good. Hopefully that'll make it, the presentation easier to follow if people's understanding's not bad at the start. Although there's not much to improve from. So a poll at the end might be similar. Okay, great. Thanks, guys. Yeah, so very good, good, and fair. Back to you, Laura.
Great, excellent. Thank you, Adam. So just moving on now, this slide is a brief introduction to the project. So I know we covered this a couple of weeks ago, but just a bit of a recap, and also for those of you who couldn't make the last sessions. So this is a technical assistance program for effective coastal marine management in TCI. It's a 3-year project which started in August 2020 and is ending in July this year. It's a partnership between DECR, JNCC and SERI, and the project is funded by the UK Darwin Plus initiative. So the goal is to develop capacity and technical capacity and evidence to support status assessment and management programs in TCI's coastal and marine environments. That's through developing technical tools and methods to enhance the evidence base for effective assessment and management of marine and coastal resources, and also in terms of providing support and training in using and applying the developed tools and methods through a knowledge exchange program. So there's 3 main themes to the project, and that's natural capital, mapping pressures and impacts assessment, and this was covered in the online workshop a couple of weeks ago that David, Adam and Johnny ran. And then also have biodiversity indicators to support policy and decision making, and that's what's being covered today in the online session. So this slide here looks at some approaches for measuring the health of ecosystem and different components to assessments that need to be considered or can be considered. So in terms of when producing an assessment of the marine environment, there are certain sort of data requirements or data input types that you might have. So, for example, this could be monitoring data that's collected through direct observations or surveys. You might have activity data. So that might be information on human activities. It could be also where they occur spatially and also the levels of that activity. And there can also be some element of modeled data. So that might be using perhaps Earth observation data that's then analysed and modeled over larger areas. Then moving on to sort of the assessment process itself, there are again various considerations, and again this isn't exhaustive list, but just things to consider in the assessment process. So first one, well, there's metrics. So that's looking at what is actually going to be measured. So for example, it could be the number of species or the number of different species or an area of a habitat, or it could be something else like some measure of water quality, for example. There's then normally a set approach or set method in order to run and analyze, run the assessment. So that's the method box there. That also needs to be considered is the baseline. So that's what you're measuring against. So it could be some time in the past, and then that is taken as the baseline, and you're looking at changes from that baseline. And the selection of baseline will vary according to the assessment itself and what the overall purpose is. But one thing to consider when selecting baselines is that the baseline itself, if it's some predefined time in the past, might not in itself be pristine or conditions. So, for example, that baseline might be perhaps showing deteriorated health, and then you're not the assessment itself wouldn't take into account any changes in health prior to that baseline. So baseline would need to be very carefully selected, and there's quite a lot of literature around about shifting baselines. So the thing you measure against might be changing in itself, might already be representing a slightly impacted ecosystem. And then the target is what you're trying to achieve in order to assess the health of the ecosystem. So, for example, a target might be that there's no loss of habitat, and then if there is a loss of the particular habitat you're looking at, the target would not have been met. Whereas if there is no loss of habitat according to the assessment method and approach you've taken, then you could say that the target, for example, has been met. And then in terms of other products, I guess, that come along with ecosystem assessments. So you could have spatial and statistical results. So this might be mapped outputs. You might also be able to have temporal trends if there's regular assessments that are repeated. So you can see how things have changed or are changing over time, and link that back to see how health has changed over time. There's also normally associated confidence in the assessment result itself. So that might be qualitative, such as just high, medium, or low. Might depend on the data that's inputted, the resolution. There are a whole number of factors that can be built in to look at confidence, but some statement of how confident you are in the statement of the condition of the ecosystem. And then also there's often supplementary information. This might be more detail perhaps on the methods itself, or if a particular software program or bit of computer code has been used in the assessment, this might be made available in supplementary information so that someone else could repeat the assessment if needed. So moving on now to look more specifically at indicators. So indicators quantify environmental changes, trends, and impacts from pressures on biodiversity. They're tools that are available to policy and decision makers to evaluate and understand environmental change. They allow assessments to be undertaken in a more consistent way without necessarily reliance on expert judgment. And they allow approaches to be standardized with a clear audit trail of data sources, methods, and production of scientific results. They allow the assessment process to be independent and transparent. And they can also allow for the efficient use of resources. So, for example, the same indicator base or approach could be used for multiple purposes and adapted without starting from scratch. So, two main uses of marine biodiversity indicators. So that's reporting of progress and success of environmental policies, and also producing assessments on the efficiency, for example, of management measures or decision-making processes. So this slide here covers sort of different assessment approaches, which go into a bit more detail in the following slide. So you can have expert judgment-based approaches, which are often based on local knowledge, and they allow you to look at the progress or implementation of plans, for example, or other socio-economic elements. Then you have the more, what I'm referring to here as model-based indicators. So they tend to be based on a combination of monitoring, pressure data, and modelling approaches. And this is also sort of somewhat covered in the previous workshop in terms of vulnerability assessments. And then you have simple or multi-metric based indicators, which are based more on direct data collection from monitoring and from surveys. So in terms of expert judgment based indicators, they can use expert or local knowledge, which is a real advantage, and they can be used where there's a lack of ecology available. And there's various methods and processes in place that can be put in place to ensure that to help elicit that expert judgment, and also to make sure the process is transparent and to reduce the risk of potential bias. And just got an example here where Gibraltar has used expert judgment where there's been a need to supplement data available. And this has been the case for their seabed and intertidal assessments for their reporting in the EU Marine Strategy assessments. So in terms of model-based indicators, these use ecological, environmental, and socio-economic data, which can then be used to infer results over a larger spatial and or temporal scale. So example of this is extent of physical disturbance indicator. So this, you might recognise this from David's presentation a couple of weeks ago. So this is an indicator that has been developed through OSPAR, so that's the Oslo Paris Convention, looking at protection of the Northeast Atlantic area. So the indicator approach itself takes input data. So that's, it takes species point data, which has been collected directly from monitoring surveys. It then uses underlying habitat map. So some of that habitat map will be data will be collated directly from surveys, and some of the information will be modelled or interpolated between data points according to environmental conditions. We then have sensitivity information, which was again covered in detail a couple of weeks ago. But that information is then combined with pressure data. So pressure information, so you have intensity of the pressure, and these are all combined to create an overall disturbance map. So it's mapped over a large area. So you might have discrete species point data, but as long as you also have habitat map, you know the sensitivity of that habitat to the pressure data, you can then produce disturbance maps over a larger area. And the last column there on that slide just shows different reporting outputs or aspects that can be produced. So moving on to sort of the last category, if you like, of indicators. So these are simple or multi-metric based indicators. So they're often based on ecological monitoring through collection and analysis of biological and environmental data. They allow change to be measured across a range of spatial scale, but that does depend on the type of monitoring and the data availability, and also how often the monitoring occurs determines the temporal scale. So if there's regular sampling that's conducted, it might be possible to calculate trends. So for example, over time, you can see how things are changing with repeat sampling. So again, I've got an example here from OSPAR, so that's the Oslo Paris Convention, and this is the condition of benthic habitat communities, but it uses a species diversity measure, in this case relative Margalef diversity, and it quantifies deviation of this Margalef diversity from a reference condition across a pressure gradient. So that might be from high to low pressure, and it looks at how this diversity value changes to produce an assessment or indication of the state of the sediment communities. And as you can see from the map there, it only has data points directly from where monitoring data has been collected or the seabed has been sampled. So it doesn't, unlike the previous example, it doesn't map over a larger area. Then have also an example of marine bird abundance. So this looks at temporal trends of breeding or non-breeding birds and looks at how the relative abundance changes. So there's, in this case, a set threshold for good status. So in order for the species to be considered in good status, 80% or 70% of the baseline needs to be met, and that varies according to the species, depending on the species' life history. And there's also a method for integration across different species, and after integration, you need 75% of species to be in good status in order for the overall marine bird abundance indicator to be considered in good status. So the graph there shows relative abundance and how that's changed across time with repeat assessments. So you have the baseline as the first point there, and then see how that has changed over time. So in this case, relative abundance index has decreased across time. And then you also have the bar chart there shows different areas of the Northeast Atlantic, different geographic areas, and then the proportion of species that are either in good or poor status according to this indicator assessment. And the overall integration here of 75% in this case hasn't been met. So it would be considered to be in not good or poor status. Now going to hand over to Adam to provide another example.
Thanks, Laura. Yeah, so Laura mentioned a couple of indicators that could be relevant to TCI, and I'm going to mention a few more coral reef related indicators. I think you guys might be using some of these anyway, so they're worth a mention. So yeah, currently the International Coral Reef Initiative has recommended 6 indicators to the Convention on Biological Diversity, and they include live coral cover, which I think Roddy mentioned earlier. Then there's other indicators like coral reef extent, fleshy algae cover, fish abundance and biomass, and more kind of response indicators like percent of coral reef effectively protected, and also like a non-biodiversity one, which is looking more at water quality, so index of coastal eutrophication. So the Global Coral Reef Monitoring Network, the Caribbean region has guidelines for these indicators. So it allows the countries Caribbean countries to collect data and then kick that up to the regional hub, and then this data gets used for the global coral reef status assessment reports by GCR MN. So yeah, that's an example of probably an indicator closer to home for you that can be used. Thanks, Laura. And oh yeah, so we've got another Slido. So I'll just put the codes there, but I'll put it in the chat because it might be easier for you to copy and paste across. So yeah, out of the sort of 3 indicator approaches there, so we've got we want to see which one is potentially most useful for TCI. I think I've put multiple options, so if you think all 3, put all 3. So yeah, we've got the expert judgment approach, which is often used with if there's like a lack of data, but the results, there's probably a bit less confidence in the results. The modeled approach, which kind of combines monitoring data, but also kind of predictions from that. So that's another option that includes data, but maybe more heavy on the kind of an analysis side. And then there's the simple multi-metric methods, which are based on like ecological monitoring, but obviously you then need quite a lot of resources for that monitoring. So I'll put the poll should be on now, so hopefully you can click on which approach you think would be potentially the most useful. Yeah, we've got some votes coming in. I'll just leave it a sec for people to vote. Obviously, it's not a massive sample size, but they're all 3 approaches are getting some likes. At the moment, modelling is a bit further ahead, I think, with 3 votes, and expert judgment, simple multi-metric with 2. But yeah, they all have their kind of pros and cons. So I think you're right in considering all of them. So yeah, modelling, simple, so all getting votes, Laura. So they're all potentially interesting and useful.
Great. Okay. Thank you very much, Adam. Yep. And as Adam has said, yeah, really well, they will have, yeah, different, I guess, advantages and different and disadvantages to each of those methods. So we'll move on now to looking at the types of data that can be used in indicators. Again, so the slide is by no means an exhaustive list, just to give some indication of the types of data or data sets that might feed into indicators. So you might have biological data, or you're very likely to have biological data in some aspect. So that might be abundance, it might be biomass, could be species diversity, biological traits, or perhaps percent cover. Again, not an exhaustive list, and it would depend on what is being assessed and what's being looked at. Then also have environmental data. So this could be used, it could feed directly into the indicator, or for example, it could be used to help stratify the biological data or to set up control samples. So that could be sea surface temperature, could be light, sediment type, or water quality. Just some examples of environmental data that can be used. And then also you might have activity and pressure data, and that was obviously covered in detail in the previous presentations, but that's more data and information that can feed into the indicator method itself. So some examples here of how indicator results are used, and these are indicators that have been developed and tested, and some examples from across the globe of how they've been used. So they can be used to inform changes to management. So for example, fishing gears causing highest impact under fishery management plans could be looked at, and that has been how some of the OSPAR indicators have been used. They can also help to define measurable thresholds. So for example, a footprint of activity could be used, and if the activity exceeds that footprint, it can be used to determine if there will be impact. Also, for OSPAR, they're being used to develop action plans to support strategic objectives. They're used in the 25-year environment plan to measure progress and confidence. And also can be used, I guess, more generally, if you like, to guide investment in data products and conservation, and also for the development of key performance indicators. So that was sort of a general look at how indicator results are used. We have another poll, I believe, so I'll hand over to Adam again.
Thanks, Laura.
Yep.
Yeah, sorry, I was on mute again. Yeah, so here's the code for this poll. So this is a free text one, so it should come up with a word cloud when you type in your text. So you should be able to see what's been mentioned the most. So yeah, it's a bit of a general one. So how do you think indicator results can be used in TCI to aid marine conservation in the future? So it's like some of the examples Laura spoke about on the previous slide, things like management measures, so like, fisheries, things like that. If your indicators are showing the health of a particular fish is decreasing, then there could be management measures brought in to try and alleviate that. Then there's other things like forming action plans. So rather than just a single management measure, it might be used more broadly for like an environment strategy, things like that. And then also there's what else did Laura mention? I think there was biodiversity, like reporting. So say if you're contributing to the reports by the global reef coral reef monitoring network, or even global more global reports like CBD and things like that. So yeah, if you want to start typing in there, and then we'll see what answers we get. And even like national reports as well, if like, yeah, someone's put in reef health reports, that could be kind of national reports. Carrying capacity as well we've got. So yeah, it can be anything, just put down whatever comes to mind. You've got bring in investment, so that's a good point. You can use indicators to potentially lever funding for certain areas. Yeah, protected area management, that's a big one. See if your protected areas are working and where to kind of direct the limited resources you've got for management. Health status of habitats, yeah. Yep, legislative changes. So kind of policy level impacts. Enforcement evaluation, yeah, that's a good one. So yeah, they don't always have to be biodiversity based indicators. You can, be looking at more kind of, say, activity based ones, so like monitoring fishing vessels, things like that. So yeah, the cloud's updated. So yeah, legislative changes is the big one that's coming out. Protected area planning as well. So yeah, MPAs and yeah, legislation. That's a big one. Right, I think no one's typing at the moment, so I'll hand back to you, Laura.
Great, thank you. And it's fantastic to see, such a long list there, and also, some importance there. So thank you very much for completing that poll. Put on the next slide here some potential uses of marine biodiversity indicators for TCI, and I think most of these have been covered by the Slido, which is fantastic. And also there are a few extra which I haven't got here, so that's brilliant to see. And as sort of talked about, informing changes to management, helping to define measurable thresholds, perhaps guiding investment in data products, and also potential use for multiple purposes, so reporting against various policies that might be global, regional, or local. So moving on now to potential links to policy areas. So again, as has already been mentioned, helping to support decision making to conserve species and habitats, can be used to support environment strategies, could be help for the 25-year environment plan or other multilateral environmental agreements, and also link into MPA management as well. So now going to move on more specifically to work that's being conducted under the Darwin Plus project. So it was work package 3 of the programme, so that's just why work package 3 is listed there. So the work was done. We've explored potential options for indicators. We conducted a literature review to look at overview of marine ecological indicators and also types of data required and also types of data that might be available. Also, we produced a scoping document with a summary of indicators which could potentially be used according to methods that are readily available and also data that's available. And then we looked at the testing and development of an indicator for seagrass extent, which I'll come on to in a bit. So this slide here just looks at some of the sources of data that we did look at. So we split that into local, regional and global. Here just some examples of the different data sources that we looked at. All have varying so I guess the global data sources might have wider spatial coverage, but you can in some cases lose the spatial resolution in that case. And local data is obviously of most relevance, but in some cases might require intensive resources to regularly, for example, regularly monitor in some places. And there's also more regional databases, so for example, Caribbean Sargassum Watch. Now, as I said, we sort of tested approach to look at seagrass extent. So I believe we've got another Slido poll to look at why seagrass is important to you and also to TCI more generally. So what its importance is. But I'll hand over to Adam.
Yeah, thanks, Laura. Yeah, just put the code in the chat again. I think this is this is a word cloud one again. So type in as many things as you like. Why you think seagrass is important. Yeah, and also if you're looking for ideas, you can think about habitat provision for certain species and which species in TCI are associated with seagrass. So yeah, we're getting a few answers coming up. Yeah, reduces wave energy, flood prevention. So there's kind of those sort of services seagrass provides. And then in terms of habitat, we've got sharks, rays, echinoderms, queen conch, mutton snapper, turtle. So lots of species associated with seagrass. Particularly queen conch, that's got a few votes. Oh, carbon storage as well. Carbon sink, yeah, so carbon element. And so yeah, echinoderms as well as queen conch, species-wise. So yeah, loads of reasons seagrass is important and yeah, why it should be protected as well. Some of the kind of natural capital elements there. Still a few people typing actually, Laura, so we'll get all the answers up. Oh, sediment stabilization, erosion prevention. Yeah, so I think we're done, Laura. Lots of reasons there.
Okay, great, thank you, Adam. Yep, so great to see so many reasons covered there. Obviously highlights the importance of seagrass. I've just got the next slide here again. I think all of these and more have been covered, which again is fantastic. So wrote down carbon storage elements, habitat provision of a number of different species, and also a diverse number of different species groups, and also the provision of erosion and flood protection. So now moving on to sort of the indicator development and the testing that we've done for seagrass extent. So this slide here looks at the data sources. So we use data from the Nature Conservancy Caribbean Habitat Map, and this map uses Earth observation data and classifies seagrass into two classifications. So that's dense seagrass and also sparse seagrass. And I've also got a point here that classification of dense and sparse seagrass could potentially be used for condition, but that's something I'll come on to in a bit. So in terms of, just showing some of the different seagrass species that are occurring, and then in more detail, looking at the method that we tested for seagrass extent. So as I've already said, I used data from the Nature Conservancy Habitat Map. Data was then converted to usable format in GIS to calculate habitat extent, and also values for dense and sparse seagrass were produced along with total seagrass values. And I should say the habitat map is also available through the TCI data portal. So this is just some example outputs. I'm going to come on to sort of various limitations in a minute, but this map shows dense and sparse seagrass areas, and also an area of total seagrass and dense and sparse seagrass. So this is all based on, is based on Earth observation data, although there is some ground truthing of the habitat maps, but it's regional. The Caribbean habitat map is regional in scope, so not necessarily specific to be ground truthed in TCI. So in terms of limitations of this approach, one of the things already mentioned is the accuracy of the data. So it's based on Earth observation data. So although there is some ground truthing of the map, it's not all surveyed data, which has a massive advantage. You can cover a much wider spatial area than going out and measuring the area of the habitat. But the disadvantage to that is that the resolution might not exactly match up, and also reliant on being able to correctly classify different seabed classes. So the also a point to put down here is the resolution of the maps and the ability to be able to detect change, and that's something we don't know at the moment. So for example, if looking at seagrass, if it's been used to look at seagrass extent, it'd be important to know how much change in seagrass extent is needed in order for that to be detected through the map. So for example, can it pick up quite small changes in seagrass extent, or would you need quite a significant change in extent for it to be detected? Other things to consider are how often the habitat map is updated, and it would need to be regularly updated in order to produce or to start to produce any kind of trends, or look at how things have changed across time. And that wouldn't be possible unless there are regular updates to the map. And then also, as already mentioned, I think is assignment of habitat classes. So how accurate is the assignment of the habitat classes? That, like I said, there was some ground truthing, or quite a lot of ground truthing of the map, but it's obviously not been done in every area. And how easy is it to assign the correct class of either seagrass or another habitat, or the difference between dense and sparse seagrass. So we've now got a Slido question around the seagrass density. So I'll hand over to Adam.
Yeah, thanks, Laura. Just wanted to, like Laura said, about the accuracy of the habitat map and the assignment of the classes. We just want to get your views on this. So the Slido poll is is saying, so at the moment, the dense and sparse elements, I mean, that could be sort of want to know whether things that have been classified as sparse, is that down to human impacts, you know, some like anchor drag, or is it just the natural variation that the species in that area are naturally, their growth densities aren't as, are more sparse? So yeah, we put the question here. So is a classification of seagrass as sparse due to human impact, natural variation, both, or unknown, more monitoring is needed? And you know, and that also relates to whether the seagrass in the map, you actually think that's in an accurate location. So I think that poll is live, so I'll let you use the code there. Oh, I think someone's got their hand up. Elise, you got your hand up.
Hey, I just had a question about, I don't think I've seen the map. I know I haven't been able to make all the sessions. But I guess my answer to that Slido question would very much depend on which area of sparseness we were looking at, because, yeah.
Yeah, good point. Yeah, so in terms of like that's for this question, if I guess is if you've got knowledge of these species, whether the kind of the density would differ. So if somewhere's classed as dense, it might be that the species' natural kind of growth is more dense. So yeah, if you're not sure about the locations, maybe try and
Yeah, I mean, I know the species, I guess the areas that are sparse, I don't know which areas are being suggested as being sparse, and then I would know whether there are boats that go there, and therefore
okay.
what it would be from anchoring, I think is.
Yeah, that's fine then. Yeah, don't worry about that. Yeah, I think when obviously you need to look a bit more in depth at the map for that. I think previously there's been issues raised in, I don't know if one of the previous workshops about the accuracy of the habitat map. So yeah, at the moment we're saying,
Is
in
that
terms
map
of
available online? Sorry.
yes, it is on the TCI data portal, and I think also the
Okay.
Alan Coral Atlas have a kind of web viewer. But
I'll
yeah,
send you a link, Alize, or put it in the chat.
If it's on the portal.
Yeah, it's on
yeah,
the portal in the marine benthic habitat map.
And yeah, that's a really good point as well about the spatial location. And I think that's something we can pick up on the online workshop as well. And hopefully, yeah, if we're all together, we can look at yeah, in more detail the spatial location. It should be easier to look at that.
yep. So at the moment, poll-wise, we're getting votes for more monitoring is needed to check if the map is accurate, and also got a couple of votes for the sparse and dense being human impact and natural variation. So I think at the moment it's just on the small sample size of this workshop, it would be unclear at the moment whether the sparse or dense is due to human impact. So that will go into the thinking about how that impacts the indicator. So I think no one's typing at the moment, so thanks for putting your info in the Slido. Yeah, hopefully, yeah, this can be investigated a bit more during. It's quite good to have these sort of open questions to be investigated during the in-person workshop.
Great, thank you very much. Yeah, for the responses. So that's, yeah, it sounds like something we can look at a bit further the in-person workshop. So that's really helpful. And in terms of that, also touched on that in terms of the slide, looking at further development of this indicator that's been tested and the approach. So as part of that, the need for more monitoring or I guess more direct monitoring, but also ground truthing of the habitat map to check that where's been defined as seagrass is indeed seagrass, and also the separation between the dense and sparse seagrass. Also, a possibility would be to incorporate activity information. So, as was being touched on before, if we know activities occurring in an area that are, for example, likely to impact on seagrass. So, for example, cause loss of seagrass because of the sensitivity of the seagrass to that activity. That could be used and incorporated, and then as being talked about under the vulnerability assessment, sort of use a risk-based approach to say if an activity is occurring in an area, then it might be that seagrass extent could be at risk of being reduced in this area because of the activity occurring. And also sort of next steps would involve developing an approach for assessing seagrass condition, which is something that we haven't tested at the moment. So it could potentially be used, the dense and sparse seagrass separation could be used to look at condition. But obviously we would need to know the answers for, I'd discussed in the previous Slido poll before that was feasible. So we need to know potentially the reasons for difference in dense and sparse seagrass. It could just be sort of natural variability, for example, that's occurring, and then it would be very hard to infer a change in the ratio, for example, between dense and sparse being a change in condition if it's just occurring naturally. And then also, these are just some examples of metrics that have been used in other cases to look at seagrass condition. So they do all involve direct monitoring data, whereas using the difference between dense and sparse seagrass could be used potentially as a proxy. So some metrics that have been used include plant density, fragmentation, morphology, or diversity. There's different aspects such as leaf morphology as well, or shoot density, looking at things such as lower depth limit for growth, or even stable isotopic signatures. So various different metrics that could be used, but all these ones listed here would require direct monitoring. So this slide here, I'm not going to cover in any detail because next week Louise is going to be covering in more detail about links to ecosystem services, and but just in terms of how this links to the indicator work. So seagrass provides a number of different services, and more work is needed to determine how indicator outputs could be used to inform the provision of these ecosystem services. So, for example, a reduction in extent of habitat may result in the loss of service provision, but those links are still, more work on defining those links is needed, and also, looking at the links between the condition of seagrass and what that means for ecosystem service provision. So, just moving on to considerations in terms of testing and developing the indicators. So main consideration, or a key consideration, should say, is data availability and also the resolution. And as well as data availability is the frequency of updates to that data set. So for example, there might be a really great and detailed data set which will provide information for a set point in time, but if that data set or data collection, for example, is not being repeated, then it will be hard to look at how the ecosystem is changing across time, because you would only have measurements from one point in time, for example. And also the frequency of running the indicator assessments themselves would need to be considered. So you might have data set that's regularly updated, but the process of running the indicator does take a certain amount of resources. Again, it depends on what indicator is being used, but need to run the indicator assessment and analysis each time. So that would need to be considered as well. And alongside that, which is linked in terms of the resources which are required to run the indicator. So some are more resource intensive to run than others. And also what the end use of the indicators are and how they link with policy. So what do we want the indicators to tell us, basically what we're looking for. So what aspect of the health, for example, of the ecosystem are we measuring? So just moving on now to summary. So just to summarise, indicators are tools that are used to quantify environmental changes, trends and impacts from pressures on biodiversity. There are a whole range of different indicator types and approaches, and they can be used in a variety of ways. And then, as we have discussed in the last few slides, a seagrass extent metric has been proposed and tested, and then looked at associated limitations and further work. So that brings me to the end of the presentation. We do have one more Slido poll in a minute, but I'll pause and ask if there are any questions. Okay, so yeah, please do let me know if there are any questions. But in the meantime, I've put the last Slido question up. So I'll hand over to Adam.
Right, thanks, Laura. Yeah, I've just put so this is the post-workshop question. So seeing how your understanding of biodiversity indicators has changed after the presentation. So I've put the code in the chat again. Yeah, and also if you've got any questions, you can put them in the chat as well if you want. So that should be polls running, I think. Yep.
Thank you, Adam. I think last time as well, yeah, I'm more than happy to be contacted by email if you have a question you think of, yeah, later on after the session. So I think Emma can share contact details. Emma, is that okay?
Yeah, no problem. I'll send around emails, like contacts and the link to the recording after the session, so that'll be available. And yeah, if you'd like me to send it on to anyone who's not here, who you think would like to see it, then I can do that as well.
Great. Thank you, Emma.
Yep, so sorry if there's a helicopter going over, if you can hear that. So far, yeah, so it's very good and good now, so we haven't confused anyone, so that's a positive. So yeah, hopefully people have yeah, it's been useful and maybe have a bit of a wider understanding of biodiversity indicators now. That's good. So yeah, polls finished now. No one's typing.
Okay, thank you. Right, well, in that case, just like to say thank you very much for joining today. And I hope you've yeah, found it helpful. I don't know, I will hand over to Emma because I don't know if there's anything about the workshop next week that needs to be said or introduced.
I suppose just as a reminder, really, that the final of the online part of this workshop series will be next Tuesday at the same time. So that's 10 till 12 in the TCI, and that'll be on kind of the natural capital side, and presented by Louise, who we met earlier. So yeah, I hope everyone can make it, and maybe see you then. Cheers, Laura.
Great. Thank you very much.
We got a clap. That's nice.
Thank you. Thank you for participating.
Thanks, Laura. That was great.
Thank you.
Okay. See you later.
Yeah. Bye bye.